The bruises on her ribs were a map of her stepfather's temper, a constant reminder that in the Wyoming Territory of 1874, a woman without means was nothing more than property. They said the mountains were a death sentence, a frozen hell where only wolves and madmen survived. But looking back at the smoking chimney of the farmhouse she called a prison, 20-year-old Genevieve realized something terrifying. The devil wasn't out there in the white squall. He was sitting at her dinner table counting the gold coins he'd just traded for her life. She took a breath of ice-cold air and stepped into the storm. The wind howled through the chinks in the log walls of the Rourke homestead, a sound that usually chilled Genevieve to the bone. Tonight, however, the cold outside was nothing compared to the icy dread settling in her stomach. She stood by the cast-iron stove, stirring a pot of thin venison stew. Her hands trembled, not from the weight of the ladle, but from the conversation drifting in from the main room. The scent of stale tobacco and cheap whiskey hung heavy in the air, the smell of her stepfather Thaddeus Rourke. "She's skinny, Thaddeus. Barely enough meat on her to keep a bed warm," a gravelly voice sneered. Genevieve recognized it. It was Silas, no? Not Silas, that name was common. This was Broderick Galt, the foreman of the copper mine 3 miles east of Bitter Creek, a man known for working horses until their hearts burst and treating women with even less regard. "She's strong," Thaddeus countered, his voice slurred but firm. "Does the washing, the chopping, and the cooking. She don't talk back, neither. I beat that out of her years ago." Genevieve flinched. The fresh welt on her shoulder throbbed in agreement. Thaddeus Rourke had taken her in after her mother died of fever when Genevieve was 10. For the last decade, he and his biological son Bartholomew had treated her as a beast of burden. Bartholomew was worse than his father. He enjoyed the cruelty. He didn't hit to punish. He hit because he was bored. $500, Thaddeus said. "That clears my tab at the saloon and leaves me enough to buy that seed bull." $300, Broderick haggled, "and I take her tonight. I need someone to cook for the crew up at the Ridge camp. And other duties." A plate slipped from Genevieve's hand. It shattered against the rough-hewn floorboards. The silence that followed was deafening. Chairs scraped against the wood. Thaddeus appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of purple rage. "You clumsy, useless witch!" He didn't use his hand this time. He unbuckled the thick leather belt from his waist. Genevieve backed into the corner, curling into a ball to protect her head, a practiced maneuver. The first strike hit her thigh, a stinging line of fire. The second caught her forearm. "Clean it up," Thaddeus roared, breathing heavily. "You're lucky Mr. Galt is generous. He's taking you off my hands. Pack your things. You leave in the hour." Thaddeus turned back to the whiskey bottle, laughing with Broderick. "See, she's docile. Takes a beating without a scream." Genevieve stared at the shards of pottery. $300. That was the price of her life. She looked at the back door. Outside, the Wyoming winter was gearing up for a blizzard. The locals called it the White Death. To leave without a horse or heavy furs was suicide. But to stay was a slower, more painful death. She moved quickly, ignoring the pain in her leg. She didn't pack clothes. She packed survival. She grabbed a small paring knife, a box of lucifer matches, and the heels of the bread loaf, shoving them into her apron pockets. She snatched her mother's old wool shawl from the hook, the only thing of value she possessed, not for money, but for the memory. Bartholomew was in the barn, likely saddling the horses for Broderick. Thaddeus and the buyer were toasting their deal. Genevieve didn't open the back door. It squeaked. Instead, she pried open the pantry window. It was small, barely wide enough for a child, but starvation had kept her slight. She shimmied through, tumbling into the snowbank outside. The wind hit her like a physical blow. It was screaming now, whipping snow into a blinding frenzy. She didn't look back at the only home she'd known. She turned her face toward the jagged peaks of the Tetons looming in the distance. The locals said a man named Declan O'Malley lived up there, a ghost, a savage, who had turned his back on civilization. They said he shot trespassers on sight. Good, Genevieve thought, trudging into the knee-deep drift. If he shoots me, at least it will be quick. The cold was a living thing. It gnawed at Genevieve's fingers and toes, turning them from painful to numb, which was far worse. She had been walking for hours, or maybe days. Time distorted in the whiteout. She had lost the trail miles ago. The dense pine forest of the lower slopes had given way to the rocky, treacherous terrain of the high country. Her wool shawl was soaked through, heavy and freezing against her skin. "Just a little further," she whispered, her lips cracked and blue. But there was no further. There was only white. Her foot caught on a buried root. She fell hard, face first, into the snow. She tried to push herself up, but her arms refused to obey. The energy was gone. The cold enveloped her like a heavy blanket, strangely warm now. She knew this sensation. It was the end. At least Broderick didn't get at me, she thought, closing her eyes. At least I die free. Declan O'Malley checked his trap line with practiced efficiency. He was a mountain of a man, standing 6'4", with a beard that hid most of his face and eyes the color of steel. He wore furs. He had tanned himself bare elk and wolf. He moved through the blizzard with the ease of a man who belonged to the wild. He hated the town of Bitter Creek. He hated the hypocrisy, the noise, the greed. He had come up here 5 years ago, after the war, to forget what he had seen and what he had done. He wanted silence. His massive dog, a wolf hybrid named Sarge, stopped suddenly, ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled in the dog's chest. "What is it, boy?" Declan grunted, his hand instinctively going to the Colt Navy revolver on his hip. Sarge didn't bark. He whined and bolted through the trees. "Sarge, heel," Declan commanded, but the dog ignored him. Cursing, Declan followed the tracks. He found the dog sniffing at a lump in the snow near the edge of a ravine. Declan approached cautiously. It looked like a discarded bundle of rags. He kicked the snow away with his boot and froze. It was a woman. Declan fell to his knees, his rough hands brushing the ice from her face. She was pale as death, her lips violet. He pulled off his heavy glove and pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Nothing. Wait. A flutter. Faint like a moth trapped in a jar. "Damn it," Declan hissed. This was a complication. He didn't want company. He didn't want trouble. A woman out here meant both. He looked at the storm raging around them. If he left her, she was dead in 10 minutes. If he took her, he was inviting the world back into his life. He swore loudly, a string of profanities that were lost to the wind. He scooped her up. She weighed nothing fragile as a bird. He tucked her inside his massive buffalo hide coat, pressing her frozen body against the warmth of his chest. "Let's go, Sarge," he shouted over the wind. "We've got a stray." The cabin was a mile up, built into the side of a cliff face for protection. It was sturdy, warm, and solitary. Declan kicked the door open and carried her inside, laying her on the rug before the roaring hearth. He worked with clinical detachment. Her clothes were frozen stiff. If he didn't get them off, the hypothermia would kill her. He stripped the wet wool away, wrapping her in dry, heated furs. He saw the bruises then. Declan paused. The firelight danced over her ribs, revealing the mottling of purple and yellow and black. Old bruises, fresh welts, marks of a belt buckle. Handprints. His jaw tightened. He knew violence. He had seen it on the battlefield. But this was domestic malice. This was the work of a coward. He rubbed her hands and feet with snow to slowly bring back circulation, careful not to damage the tissue. She moaned a sound of pure agony as the blood began to flow again. "Quiet now." He rumbled, his voice rusty from disuse. "You're safe." For 3 days she burned with fever. Declan barely slept. He fed her broth made from bone marrow spoon by spoon. He placed cool rags on her forehead when she thrashed screaming names he didn't know. Thaddeus, Broderick. Don't sell me. The words pieced together a story that made Declan's blood run hot. On the morning of the 4th day, the storm broke. The sun streamed through the small window, illuminating the dust motes in the air. Genevieve opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the ceiling rough timber beams, not the stained plaster of the Rourke house. The second thing she saw was a monster. He was sitting in a rocking chair by the fire, whittling a piece of pine. He was huge, his hair long and wild, his face scarred. A massive beast of a dog lay at his feet. Genevieve gasped, scrambling backward on the pallet, clutching the furs to her chest. The man stopped whittling. He looked up, his steel eyes meeting hers. He didn't smile. He didn't move to comfort her. "You're loud when you sleep," he said flatly. Where am I?" Her voice was a croak. "Top of White Peak." "My cabin." He stood up and Genevieve flinched, expecting a blow. Declan saw the flinch. He stopped mid-rise, then slowly sat back down, making himself smaller. "I ain't gonna hit you, girl. If I wanted you dead, I would have left you in the snow." "Who are you?" "Declan. Some call me Wolf. Doesn't matter much." He gestured to the pot on the stove. "Eat. You look like a stiff wind would blow you away." Genevieve hesitated. Her stomach roared, overriding her fear. She took the bowl he offered her, hands shaking. It was stew, rich, thick, and meaty. It tasted like heaven. "Why?" she asked after several spoonfuls. "Why did you save me?" Declan looked out the window toward the valley below, where the smoke of Bitter Creek was a smudge against the sky. "Because I saw your ribs," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "And I know what it looks like when a man tries to break something just to see if it snaps." He turned back to her. "Who did that to you?" Genevieve lowered her gaze. "My family." "Family protects," Declan grunted. "That wasn't family. That was an owner." A silence stretched between them, not comfortable but not hostile. "They'll come looking," Genevieve whispered. "Thaddeus, he sold me to a man named Broderick Galt. He paid $300. They won't just let that money walk away." Declan's hand tightened on the knife handle he was holding. The wood splintered. "Let them come," Declan said, and for the first time Genevieve saw a spark of something dangerous in his eyes. It wasn't cruelty. It was the fierce, terrifying protectiveness of a predator defending its territory. "The snow covers tracks well, but if they find their way up here, they'll find that the mountain has teeth." Weeks turned into a month. The harsh Wyoming winter maintained its grip on the mountains, creating a fortress of ice around Declan's cabin. For Genevieve, it was a time of strange, terrifying peace. She expected servitude. She tried to take over the chores immediately, scrubbing the floor, mending Declan's torn shirts, cooking the game he brought in. One evening, as she frantically scrubbed a cast-iron skillet, Declan's large hand gently covered hers, stopping the motion. "Stop," he said. Genevieve froze, her heart hammering. I can get the spot out. I promise. Don't be angry." Declan crouched down so he was eye level with her. "I ain't Thaddeus. You aren't paying rent with sweat here. You sit, read a book, rest." "I don't know how to read," she admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. Declan paused. He stood up, walked to a wooden chest, and pulled out a worn, leather-bound book. It was The Count of Monte Cristo. "Then I'll teach you," he said. And he did. By the light of the fire, the mountain man who the townspeople claimed was a savage taught her letters. He taught her how to shoot a Winchester rifle. He taught her how to walk in snowshoes without falling. In turn, Genevieve softened the edges of his solitude. She organized his chaotic supplies. She baked bread using a sourdough starter she cultivated. She hummed while she worked a sound that initially annoyed Declan, but soon became the only thing that allowed him to sleep soundly. But the world below was not idle. In Bitter Creek, Thaddeus Rourke was a desperate man. Broderick Galt was demanding his money back, or the merchandise. Thaddeus had already gambled away half the gold. "She's dead, I tell you," Thaddeus pleaded in the saloon. "No girl survives the White Death." "I don't care if she's a frozen corpse," Broderick spat, slamming his fist on the bar. "I paid for her. I want proof, and if she's alive, I want to break her myself for running." A man at the end of the bar, a fur trapper named Ezekiel, cleared his throat. "I saw smoke up on White Peak yesterday, near the Wolf's Den. More smoke than usual." Broderick's eyes narrowed. "O'Malley." "He don't take to visitors," Ezekiel warned. "He's a war hero, they say, or a war criminal. Depends who you ask." "He's one man," Broderick sneered. "I have a crew of miners who haven't punched anything in weeks. We ride at dawn." The first warning was not a sound, but a silence. The winter birds, usually raucous in the morning light, had ceased their chatter. Sarge the wolf dog stood rigid by the heavy oak door, the hackles on his back rising like a jagged ridge. Declan was cleaning his Winchester 1873 rifle. He didn't look up, but his muscles coiled tight under his flannel shirt. "Get down," he said softly to Genevieve. "What?" Genevieve was kneading dough at the table flour, dusting her cheek. "Get down, now." Before Genevieve could drop the front window, shattered inward. A bullet tore through the air, embedding itself in the log wall, exactly where Genevieve's head had been a second before. She screamed, dropping to the floor and scrambling toward the overturned heavy oak table as Declan had taught her. Declan was already moving. He kicked the table further to shield her, then slid to the side of the window, levering around into the chamber of his rifle. "Come out, O'Malley!" a voice boomed from the tree line. It was Broderick Galt. "Send the girl out, and we might just leave you bleedin' instead of dead." Declan didn't answer. He waited. He watched the shadows of the pines. A movement to the left, a flash of a brown duster coat. Declan fired. A scream echoed through the valley, followed by a thud. "That's one," Declan counted grimly. He looked back at Genevieve. Her eyes were wide, terror-stricken, but she wasn't crying. She was gripping the small knife he had given her. "Stay low. If anyone comes through that door, you stick them. You don't hesitate. You aim for the neck or the belly." "How many?" she asked, her voice trembling. Too many for a fair fight. Declan grunted. Good thing I don't fight fair. Bullets began to hail against the cabin, splintering the wood and pinging off the cast-iron stove. Broderick had brought a small army. Declan moved like a phantom firing from the window, then the rifle loop he had cut into the door, then a chink in the back logs. He made himself seem like 5 men. But they were flanking him. Burn him out! Thaddeus Rourke's voice screeching over the gunfire. Burn the rat in his hole! Genevieve felt a cold knot of rage replace her fear. That was the man who was supposed to be her father. He wasn't just selling her. He was actively trying to kill the only person who had ever shown her kindness. A bottle filled with kerosene, a rag burning at the neck, sailed through the broken window. It smashed against the far wall, igniting the dry furs hanging there. The fire caught instantly, licking up the timber walls. "Declan!" Genevieve shouted, coughing as black smoke filled the small space. "I see it." Declan fired 2 more shots, dropping a man who was rushing the porch. He turned to Genevieve. "We have to move. The trapdoor." He grabbed a heavy iron ring set into the floorboards under the rug, a feature Genevieve hadn't known existed. He heaved it open, revealing a dark, jagged hole leading into the earth. "Go!" Declan roared as the flames began to consume the ceiling. "It leads to the old mining tunnels. Go straight. Keep your hand on the left wall. Do not stop. I'm not leaving you. I'm right behind you, woman. Go." Genevieve lowered herself into the darkness. The air down there was stale and cold. She heard Declan fire 3 rapid shots, covering fire, before the light above was suddenly extinguished. He had dropped into the hole and pulled the heavy trapdoor shut above them. They were plunged into absolute darkness. Above them the muffled sounds of the cabin burning and men shouting could be heard, but they were safe from the bullets. "Take my hand." Declan's voice came from the dark, steady and calm. She reached out and found his large, calloused hand. He squeezed hers firmly. "I've got you, Genevieve. I've got you." They moved through the suffocating blackness of the tunnels, the heat of the fire fading behind them, leaving only the cold damp of the mountain's heart. The tunnels were a labyrinth of forgotten dreams. These were the old silver mines abandoned 20 years ago, when the veins ran dry. Declan knew them by heart. He had spent his first winter mapping them to ensure he always had an escape route. They walked for hours. Genevieve's legs ached, and her breath hitched in the thin, dusty air. The only sound was the crunch of their boots on loose shale and the rhythmic panting of Sarge, who trotted ahead of them, his nose guiding the way. Finally, the tunnel widened. A faint grey light filtered from high above, a natural fissure in the rock face. They were in a large cavern, dry and sheltered. Declan had stashed supplies here, a crate of hardtack, a few blankets, and a lantern. He lit the lantern, the warm glow pushing back the shadows. Genevieve collapsed onto a blanket, her face smudged with soot, her dress torn at the hem. Declan sat opposite her, checking his rifle. He looked tired. The invincible mountain man looked human for the first time. He had a graze on his cheek where a bullet had flown too close. "Let me see," Genevieve said, reaching out. She took a clean strip of cloth from his supply kit and dabbed at the blood on his face. Declan flinched, then leaned into her touch. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing," she whispered. "You lost everything because of me. Your home. Your things." Declan caught her wrist. His eyes searched hers. "A house is just wood. Genevieve. Wood grows back. What I found in the snow. That doesn't come around twice. The intensity of his words hung in the air. In the adrenaline of the escape, the boundaries between them had dissolved. He wasn't the scary recluse anymore. He was her partner, her protector. And she was no longer the victim. She was the reason he was fighting. "Why is Broderick so desperate?" Declan mused, breaking the moment to focus on the tactical situation. "He's a businessman. Spending this much money on mercenaries, risking the law coming down on him. Just for a $300 bride. It don't add up. The math is wrong." Genevieve pulled her shawl tighter around herself, the old wool shawl she had taken from the house. It was the only comfort she had left. "He's a cruel man, Declan. Maybe his pride is hurt. Men like Galt don't kill for pride." Declan shook his head. "They kill for profit. There's something else." Genevieve sighed, her fingers nervously, picking at the hem of the shawl. During the scramble in the tunnel, the lining had snagged on a sharp rock. A thread was loose. As she fiddled with it, she felt something stiff inside the layers of wool. It crinkled. "What's that?" Declan asked, his hearing sharp. I don't know." Genevieve frowned. She pulled at the loose thread. The stitching, old and brittle, gave way. Inside the lining of the shawl, folded into a tight, flat square, was a piece of oilskin paper. It had been sewn in with deliberate care, hidden so well that Genevieve had worn it for 10 years without knowing. She pulled it out. Her hands shook. "What is it?" Declan moved closer, bringing the lantern with him. Genevieve unfolded the oilskin. Inside were 2 documents. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but legible. It's a marriage certificate," she said, reading the script. "Between my mother, Elena, and Arthur Pendleton." "Pendleton." Declan's eyes narrowed. "I know that name. Old Man Pendleton. He discovered the Copperhead lode, the biggest strike in the territory. He died in a mining accident 12 years ago." Genevieve picked up the second document. It was a last will and testament. "I, Arthur Pendleton, being of sound mind, do hereby leave my entire estate, including the deed to the Copperhead mine, and all land claims attached to my beloved wife, Eleanor. Upon her death, all assets shall pass to our sole daughter, Genevieve Pendleton." The silence in the cave was heavier than the stone above them. "My father," Genevieve whispered, the realization crashing over her like a wave. "My father wasn't a drifter who died of drink, like Thaddeus said. My father was Arthur Pendleton." Declan took the paper, scanning it with a dark expression. "And the date on the will? It's 2 weeks before he died. And who was his partner? Who took over the mine when Arthur died?" "Broderick Galt," Genevieve breathed. "Galt." Declan spat the name. "He stole it. He killed your father. I'd bet my life on it. And he took the mine. But he couldn't find the deed. Your mother must have hidden it. And then he waited." Genevieve realized horror dawning on her. "He waited until my mother died. Then he let Thaddeus keep me beaten and ignorant while he milked the mine dry. But why buy me now?" "Because the claim is up for renewal." Declan said, his mind working like a strategist. "Or maybe he found out you were asking questions. Or maybe he just wanted to tie up the last loose end. If he marries you, the mine is legally his again. If he kills you, the line of succession ends, and he can claim it by default." Genevieve looked at the paper, the piece of trash that had been wrapping her shoulders while she scrubbed floors and took beatings. She wasn't a servant. She was the owner of the very ground Broderick Galt walked on. She owned the town that had turned its back on her. He knows, Genevieve said, her voice hardening. He knows who I am. That's why he's hunting us. He thinks he's hunting a rabbit. Declan stood up, checking the load in his revolver. He looked down at her, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. He doesn't know he just woke up a bear. Declan extended his hand to her again. You aren't just Genevieve the orphan anymore. You're Genevieve Pendleton, the Copper Queen of Wyoming. And I think it's time we went and collected your inheritance. How? She asked. They have an army. We don't need an army, Declan said, strapping his hunting knife to his leg. We have the truth, and we have the high ground, but we can't stay here. We have to get to Cheyenne. We have to get this paper to a federal judge before Galt puts a bullet in us. Cheyenne is a week's ride, Genevieve said. Through the storm. What all? Then we better get moving, Declan said. But first we need horses, and I know exactly where to get them. Where? Broderick's camp, Declan said. They're busy watching my burning cabin. They won't be watching their own picket line. The descent from the mine shaft brought them out at the base of the mountain, a mile east of where Declan's cabin now smouldered as a blackened ruin against the snow. The blizzard had abated, leaving behind a crystal-clear night sky, filled with stars that looked cold enough to shatter. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of drunken celebration from Broderick's camp. They were celebrating a victory. They hadn't actually won. Declan moved with the stealth of the predator he was named after, leaving Genevieve and Sarge hidden in a dense thicket of juniper bushes. He melted into the darkness toward the flickering campfires. Genevieve waited, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She clutched the oilskin packet containing her future against her chest. Every snapping twig sounded like a boot step. She was no longer just fighting for survival. She was fighting for reclaiming a stolen life. 20 agonizing minutes passed. Then a shadow detached itself from the night. Declan appeared leading 2 saddled horses. One was a sturdy, shaggy-coated mare. The other was a magnificent black stallion, Broderick Galt's prized Mount Lucifer. They were too busy toasting my death to watch the picket line, Declan whispered, handing her the mare's reins. Can you ride? I'll learn fast, Genevieve said, swinging awkwardly into the saddle. The mare danced nervously beneath her. Stay close to my flank. We ride hard until dawn. No stopping. They kicked the horses into a gallop, the snow muffling the hoofbeats initially. But as they hit the hard-packed trail, leading away from the valley, the sound echoed through the night. A shout went up behind them. Then another. A gunshot cracked the air, the bullet whining uselessly high above their heads. The chase was on. They rode like demons possessed. The wind whipped Genevieve's hair across her face, stinging her eyes. Her thighs burned from gripping the saddle muscles unused to riding protesting violently. But the fear of what lay behind Broderick's cold fury and Thaddeus's drunken cruelty was a far greater motivator than pain. By dawn, they had put 20 miles between themselves and Bitter Creek. They stopped only to let the horses blow in a narrow canyon that offered some shelter from the biting wind. Declan helped Genevieve down. Her legs gave way as soon as they touched the ground, and he caught her holding her steady against his chest. For a moment, they just stood there, exhausted, breathing in the steam rising from the horses' flanks. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a raw, terrifying intimacy. He looked down at her, his steel eyes softer than she had ever seen them. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, a touch so gentle it made her shiver more than the cold. "You did good, Genevieve," he murmured. It was the first time he had used her name without a gruff edge. "I was terrified," she admitted, leaning into his warmth. "Fear keeps you alive. It's panic that kills you." He tightened his arms around her briefly, before stepping back, the walls going back up, though thinner this time. "We have to keep moving. Cheyenne is still 5 days' hard ride. Galt won't give up. He's losing a fortune with every mile we make." The journey became a blur of exhaustion, cold and relentless forward motion. They slept in shifts of 2 hours, huddled together under blankets beneath rocky overhangs, Sarge acting as a living heater at their feet. They ate cold hardtack and dried jerky. During those long frozen nights under the vast western sky, they talked. Declan spoke of the war of the horrors at Shiloh that had driven him to the solitude of the mountains. He spoke of a guilt that refused to wash away. And Genevieve spoke of her mother, a gentle woman crushed by a harsh world, who had yet possessed the strength to hide the truth of her daughter's legacy right under her oppressor's nose. She spoke of 10 years of being treated lower than the camp dogs, of the slow erosion of her hope until the night she climbed out the pantry window. "I used to think I saved you," Declan said quietly, on the 3rd night, staring into the dying embers of their small, concealed fire. "But I think maybe you woke me up. I was just existing up on that peak, waiting to die." Genevieve reached out and took his large, scarred hand in hers. "We saved each other, Declan." Their bond, forged in the fires of survival, became unbreakable. They weren't just running from something anymore. They were running towards something together. But their pursuers were relentless. Broderick Galt had hired professional trackers, men who could follow a shadow across sandstone. By the afternoon of the 5th day, as the desolate plains began to give way to the foothills preceding Cheyenne, they saw the dust cloud behind them. They were close, less than 2 miles back. "Their horses are fresher," Declan assessed grimly, looking back over his shoulder. "They'll overtake us before we reach the city limits." They were riding through a maze of sandstone pillars and dry gullies, an area known as the Devil's Garden. It was treacherous ground for horses at full gallop. "We have to make a stand," Declan said, pulling Lucifer to a sliding halt near a cluster of high rocks that offered cover. "Get up into those rocks. Keep your head down. If they get past me, you know what to do." He handed her his hunting knife. Genevieve took it, her hands shaking, but her eyes clear. She climbed into the rocks, positioning herself with a view of the trail. Declan slapped the rump of Genevieve's mare, sending it galloping off to draw fire. Then he led Lucifer deep into a crevice. He pulled his Winchester from its scabbard, chambered around, and waited. The thunder of approaching hooves filled the canyon. Broderick Galt rode at the head of the pack, his face a mask of sunburned fury. Beside him rode Thaddeus Rourke, looking miserable and terrified, held in his saddle only by fear of Broderick. Behind them were 5 hard-looking hired guns. They slowed as they entered the rock formation, sensing a trap. "O'Malley!" Broderick shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "It's over. Give me the girl and the papers, and I'll let you die quick." Declan's answer was a rifle shot that knocked the hat off the lead tracker's head. The man yelped and wheeled his horse around. Chaos erupted. Bullets chipped away at the sandstone around Declan's position. He returned fire with calm, deadly precision, dropping one man from his saddle and wounding another's horse, sending it rearing. "Flank him! Get around the back!" Broderick screamed at his men. 2 riders broke away, heading toward the back of the rock formation, towards where Genevieve was hidden. Genevieve saw them coming. She saw the glint of their pistols. Terror threatened to paralyze her, to turn her back into the cowering girl in the kitchen. But then she touched the oilskin packet inside her dress. She remembered her mother. She remembered Declan's warm hand on her jaw. No, she thought. Never again. She wasn't armed with a rifle, but she was above them. As the first rider passed beneath her ledge, she heaved a melon-sized rock over the edge. It struck the rider square in the shoulder. He roared in pain, losing control of his horse, which stumbled and threw him into the dust. The second rider looked up, raising his pistol at her. Before he could fire, a grey blur launched itself from the rocks below. Sarge. The wolf dog hit the rider in the chest, dragging him out of the saddle in a snarling tangle of fur and teeth. Down below, Declan had thinned the herd, but he was pinned down. Thaddeus, seeing an opening, spurred his horse toward Declan's blind spot, his face twisted in drunken bravado. "She's mine, you mountain trash," Thaddeus yelled, raising an old rusty pistol. A shot rang out, but it didn't come from Declan. Thaddeus screamed, clutching his right shoulder as his pistol flew from his hand. He fell from his horse, writhing in the dirt. Declan looked up. Genevieve stood on the high rock smoke curling from the barrel of the small Derringer pistol Broderick had kept in his saddlebags on Lucifer, a weapon she had found and hidden during the ride. Her aim had been true. She hadn't killed her stepfather, but she had stopped him. The distraction was all Declan needed. He broke from cover, charging Broderick. Broderick fired wildly, missing his nerve, gone now that his hired guns were down or fled. Declan tackled him off his horse. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dust fists flying. It was a brutal, ugly fight, fueled by years of differing resentments. Broderick fought with the desperation of a man losing a kingdom. Declan fought with the cold fury of a man protecting his world. Finally, Declan landed a crushing blow to Broderick's jaw, followed by another to his temple. Broderick slumped back against a rock, dazed blood streaming from his nose. Declan stood over him, chest heaving, his revolver drawn, and aimed between Broderick's eyes. "You killed Arthur Pendleton," Declan accused, his voice low and dangerous. Broderick spat blood, a jagged grin appearing. "Prove it, savage. It was an accident in the dark." "I don't need to prove it to a judge to know the truth." Declan cocked the hammer. "Declan, no." Genevieve scrambled down the rocks, rushing to his side. She put a hand on his arm, lowering the gun barrel. "Don't. He's not worth the hangman's noose. Let the law have him. We have the proof. Let him rot in a cell knowing a woman took everything from him." Declan looked at her. The rage in his eyes slowly receded, replaced by a profound weariness, and beneath that love. He holstered his gun. "You're right," he grunted. He pulled some rawhide cord from his pocket and roughly tied Broderick's hands. Thaddeus was whimpering nearby. Bartholomew, the tracker Sarge had attacked, was groaning but alive. The others had fled. "Get up!" Declan kicked Broderick's boot. "We're going to Cheyenne. You're going to walk." The arrival of Declan O'Malley and Genevieve Pendleton in Cheyenne was not merely an event. It was a spectacle that would be written about in the territorial papers for years to come. They did not sneak in under the cover of darkness. They rode down the main thoroughfare at high noon, the sun beating down on their exhausted, dust-caked figures. They looked less like victors and more like revenants returning from the grave. Genevieve's dress was torn at the hem and stained with the red dirt of the Devil's Garden, her hair a wind-blown tangle around a face that had seen too much fear. Declan rode beside her, dark and imposing, his Winchester resting easy across his saddle, his eyes scanning the rooftops with the habitual wariness of a man who expects ambush. But it was what they dragged behind them that stopped the traffic in the street. tied to their saddle horns with thick rawhide ropes, stumbling and defeated, were two men Broderick Galt, once the terrifying kingpin of the mining district, walked with his head bowed. His fine clothes ruined his hands bound tightly behind his back. Beside him, Thaddeus Rourke wept openly, a pathetic, broken figure, begging for water, for mercy, for anyone to listen. No one listened. The townsfolk of Cheyenne parted like the Red Sea, watching in stunned silence as the mountain man and the girl marched their captors straight to the steps of the federal marshal's office. The legal proceedings that followed were a whirlwind, a stark contrast to the slow, quiet terror of Genevieve's life before. Inside the heavy oak-paneled courtroom, the air smelled of stale cigar smoke and justice. The presiding judge, an austere man named Judge Halloway, adjusted his spectacles as he examined the oilskin packet Genevieve had pulled from the lining of her shawl. The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the scratching of the court clerk's pen and the heavy breathing of Thaddeus Rourke, who was huddled in the defendant's chair. "I knew Arthur Pendleton," the clerk said, his voice trembling slightly as he looked up from the yellowed documents. He looked at Genevieve, really seeing her for the first time. "I played cards with him. This is his hand. There is no doubt." The gavel came down like a thunderclap. Broderick Galt's house of cards didn't just fall. It was incinerated. Confronted with the undeniable proof of the marriage certificate and the will and the damning testimony of the hired guns who had turned state's witness to save their own necks, Galt's arrogance evaporated. He didn't scream or beg. He simply stared at the table, his face a mask of grey defeat, realizing that the rabbit he had hunted had grown claws. Thaddeus was not so dignified. When the judge stripped him of all guardianship rights and sentenced him to 20 years for assault, child endangerment, and fraud, he had to be dragged from the courtroom, screaming that he was a good father, that she owed him everything. Genevieve watched him go. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. For the first time in 10 years, his voice held no power over her. It was just noise. Overnight, the narrative changed. Genevieve was no longer the starving orphan of Bitter Creek. She was recognized as the sole heir to the Copperhead Lode. She was the wealthiest woman in the Wyoming Territory. Bankers who would have previously stepped over her in the street now tipped their hats as she passed. Store owners rushed to open doors, but Genevieve found that the gold meant very little to her. What mattered was the air in her lungs, air that finally felt free. 3 months later, the harsh, white grip of winter had finally released the high country. Spring exploded across the valley in a riot of wildflowers, lupine paintbrush and columbine painting the slopes in purple and red. Bitter Creek was a town transformed. With Galt gone, the suffocating atmosphere of fear had lifted. The mine was running again, but under new management. Genevieve had insisted on fair wages, safe timbering for the tunnels, and a doctor on retainer for the crew. They called her the Copper Queen, a title spoken with genuine reverence rather than fear. Genevieve stood on the porch of her new home. It was built on the same land where the Rourke shack had once stood, but the old rotting timber had been burned to ash. In its place stood a sturdy 2-story house painted white with a wraparound porch that faced the mountains. She wore a dress of deep blue silk, tailored to fit a frame that was no longer gaunt from starvation. Her hair was pinned up, shining with health in the afternoon sun. Yet draped over the railing beside her was the old, faded wool shawl. She refused to throw it away. It was a reminder of who she had been and who she had survived. She was watching the road. She did this every afternoon. A shadow detached itself from the tree line. A horseman approached. Genevieve's heart did a familiar stutter step. Declan O'Malley tied his horse to the hitching post. He moved with the same predatory grace, but the wildness had been tempered. He wore clean denim and a fresh flannel shirt. His beard, once a tangled thicket that hid his face, was trimmed close, revealing a strong, handsome jawline and a mouth that was learning how to smile again. He didn't live in the big white house. He couldn't. The town was too loud, too crowded for a man who had spent 5 years listening to the wind. He was rebuilding his cabin up on White Peak, reclaiming his sanctuary. He stepped onto the porch, the heavy boots echoing on the wood. He stopped a few feet from her, removing his hat. The tension between them wasn't awkward. It was electric, a magnetic pull between two souls who had seen the bottom of the abyss together. Marshall says Galt is being transferred to the territorial prison at Laramie tomorrow. Declan said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Genevieve's chest. Judge says he'll likely hang for your father's murder before the year is out. It's truly over then, Genevieve said softly. She looked out over the valley, the green grass swaying in the breeze. The ghosts are gone. The fighting part is, Declan agreed. He stepped closer, leaning against the porch column, his steel-grey eyes fixed on her face. I was thinking about the cabin. Genevieve turned to him, a small smile playing on her lips. Is the roof finished? It is. Declan nodded. And the walls are thick. But I made a change. I cut a bigger window in the south wall. Lots of light. It would be a good place for reading, or for sitting and watching the sun go down, without being afraid of what the dark brings. The implication hung in the warm spring air. He wasn't just talking about carpentry. He was telling her that he had built a space for her in his world, a world he had once barred everyone from entering. Genevieve walked over to him. She reached out her hand, resting against his chest, feeling the steady, powerful beat of his heart. Is that an invitation, Mr. O'Malley? She teased gently, her eyes searching his. Declan didn't laugh. He looked at her with a fierce, terrifying intensity, the look of a man who had found the only thing in the world worth dying for. He covered her hand with his own, his calloused palm rough against her skin. It's a proposal, Genevieve, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I don't fit in this valley. I don't fit in this town. But the mountain gets mighty lonely without its queen. Tears pricked Genevieve's eyes. Happy tears. She looked at the big house behind her, filled with fine things, and then up at the rugged peaks where the wind howled and the wolves sang. She knew where she belonged. Then take me home, Declan, she whispered. He kissed her, then a searing promise sealed under the vast, endless western sky. It was a kiss that bridged the gap between the civilized world and the wild, between the past and the future. The town below would continue to whisper. They would tell stories about the copper queen who ran the mine with an iron fist, but disappeared into the high timber every weekend. They would talk about the wolf who came down from the snow to save her. But Genevieve and Declan didn't care about the stories. They had found their destiny, not in the gold of the mine, but in the silence of the winter woods, where a mountain man had saved a girl, and a girl had saved him right back. And that is the epic saga of Genevieve and Declan, from a beaten girl sold for $300 to the wealthiest woman in the territory, and the reclusive mountain man who found his humanity again by fighting for her. It's a story of survival justice and a love forged in the absolute harshest conditions. I really hope you enjoyed this long-form storytelling experience. This was a massive story to put together, around 8,000 words of twists and turns. If you made it all the way to the end, you are an absolute legend. Please, if this story moved you, smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with anyone who loves a gritty Western romance with a powerful heroine. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell so you get notified the second I drop the next story. Let me know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Was it the cave discovery, the horse heist, or Genevieve taking the shot at Thaddeus? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.